I can bet my bottom dollar that when you think of Ireland, you think of St. Patrick, the revered patron saint of the country. You'd also most probably think of a country with a rich heritage and beautiful greenery. If you love your beer, you will definitely think of Guinness, Ireland's most iconic gift to the global beer industry. And if you happen to be a fan of soulful music, then Enya, who is unarguably the country's biggest musical export, and her famous Gaelic tunes will definitely be at the forefront of your thoughts. But as a potential investor willing to invest in the beautiful country, or an immigrant job seeker gearing up to move to Ireland in search of greener pastures, have you ever thought about the country's economic prospects? What is the current state of the Irish economy? And what are the challenges, if any, facing the economy? Is the future bright for the Irish economy? The answers to these and other similar questions are what we will explore in this interesting video. So without further ado, let us delve straight into exploring the current state of the Irish economy in its totality. Ireland has been ranked as the most productive country in the world by the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development. If we backtrack a little, we'd find that Ireland's economic history has been a story of flux. From the country's independence to today, the state has moved through economic and social peaks and troughs in the context of shifting economic approaches. From fiscal conservatism to protectionism, outward orientation, deficit-financed expenditure, bubble and bust, and to embracing innovation, investment, globalization, and competitiveness, Ireland has lived through a century of great change. Now, a prominent feature of the Irish economy is its dual nature, a global export-orientated multinational sector and a more domestically orientated, labor-intensive sector dominated by small and medium-sized enterprises. During the most challenging periods, the Irish government has taken the time to lift its head from the day-to-day short-term work and immediate policy responses in order to reflect on the dynamics of the world around us, and has been prepared to change and adapt its economic approach accordingly. The first programme for economic expansion in the 1950s, the NESC Telesis Study, the Council Strategy for Development in the 1980s, and the work of the Industrial Policy Review Group in the 1990s are just 4 examples of the policy system looking out and ahead to ensure that the economy was positioned as best as it could be to deal with the changes and challenges facing it. In those instances, Ireland recognised, analysed and addressed the limitations of an inward-looking, conservative economic strategy, the barriers to development, and the narrowness of an enterprise policy approach with significant success. This involved winding down certain long-standing policies and doubling down on others, introducing new policy measures and incentives, creating new institutions, seeking greater international agreement and cooperation, and broadening Ireland's approach overall. In the 1990s, serious consideration was given to what economic model was right for Ireland, and comparisons were made with other smaller, open trading economies across Europe. The National Economic and Social Council, NESC, played a leading role in developing the economic model by producing a number of relevant reports in this period. Meanwhile, since the 1950s, policy in the Emerald Isle has consistently sought to open up her economy to the opportunities afforded by international capital mobility, free EU membership, and globalization. Over the decades, major elements of this strategy have included the expansion of second and third level education from the 1990s onwards, the adoption of the euro in 1999, and the upgrading of transport and other public investments aided by EU structural and cohesion funds in the 1990s and 2000s. A particularly long-standing element of this strategy has been a low corporation tax rate, a cornerstone of industrial and enterprise policy aimed at attracting foreign direct investment. Here is the interesting thing. Ireland offers a low corporate tax rate of 12.5%, which is significantly lower than many of the other common global markets in Europe, including France 25%, Germany 15.8%, and Luxembourg 25%. So the consistent pursuit of this policy has helped transform Ireland's industrial base from a small, inefficient, protected domestic sector to a thriving, highly productive and innovative industrial and internationally traded services sector with a large foreign-owned share. Earlier on, we spoke about Ireland being ranked as the most productive country on earth. This is defined by the gross value added per employee. In other words, what productivity refers to in economics is how much value a worker adds to the things they make or do, and some workers are in a position to add more value than others. For example, despite being busy all day, the productivity of someone behind the counter of a cafe is limited to how much people are willing to pay for the food and drinks they sell. whereas someone at a technology or pharmaceutical multinational is more likely to be working on high-value products and services, making them more productive in official figures. There are several methods for measuring productivity: gross value added, labour productivity, company productivity, etc. But then, in Ireland, the key metrics all point to a dual economy between the foreign direct investment-dominated sector and the rest of the economy. They also point to a very high degree of concentration, where a small number of companies in the country are generating high productivity growth. This represents a potential vulnerability for the economy of Ireland. Anyway, the simple reason for Ireland's amazing productivity levels is the predominance of multinationals in the Emerald Isle. Lured by one of the most attractive corporate tax rates in the world, Ireland is home to more than 1,000 foreign direct investment giants. Companies such as Google, HP, Apple, IBM, and Facebook employ tens of thousands and have brought over 54 billion in revenue to the island. That's right. Since the 1990s, Ireland has more than doubled its labour productivity, while countries such as the UK, Germany, and France have failed to reverse declining levels. There is, however, a serious productivity gap between foreign and domestic companies in Ireland. When these globalised or multinational sectors are removed, productivity in the domestic or deglobalised sector was €56 per hour of work, which was considerably closer to the EU average of €38 an hour. During the 2020 pandemic, its impact served to reinforce the duality of the Irish economy. The gross value added of sectors dominated by multinational companies grew by 23.1% between 2019 and 2020. That is, gross value added for the sectors dominated by multinational companies was €186 billion and €168 billion for the other sectors. The figures underscore how the aggregate picture is masking the increasing divergence between the two sectors of the Irish economy. Industry and ICT accounted for 35% and 15% of GVA respectively, but only accounted for a 12% and 5% share of employment. The sectors where small and medium-sized enterprises are more prevailing, such as agriculture, construction, arts, have a small share of GVA but a relatively significant share of employment in 2019. As we mentioned before, Ireland has a significant productivity advantage compared to the euro area. However, almost two-thirds of the gap is explained by the pharmaceutical and chemical industry and ICT services, accounting for 8 and 9 percentage points respectively of the 26 percentage points gap. In terms of the domestic sector, there is a negative productivity gap between Ireland and the euro area. This is from sectors such as agriculture, construction, wholesale, retail, transportation, accommodation, and food services. The CSO data shows that foreign companies tend to be more productive and larger than domestic companies. Indeed, the productivity levels in foreign-owned companies significantly exceed domestic companies even within the same sector. Meanwhile, last year, 2023, many experts agree that the Irish economy was underwhelmed. So far, the country has seen 3 quarters of very negative growth, marking a technical recession, and is expected to have rounded out the year with a negative annual growth rate of -1.8%. This shows that the multinational activity in Ireland doesn't just have an inflating effect on GDP growth, it can also work the other way around. This correlation to GDP is not the familiar statistical noise related to accounting. It can also, in part, be derived from the pharmaceutical sector, which is huge in Ireland as it represents about 2% of total employment. It has seen a large correction this year, which came after an extraordinary boom during the pandemic years, from which the Irish economy profited. The current moderation of production has also resulted in a decline in pharmaceutical exports for Ireland, as most production is for external demand. However, the decline is not fully explained by multinational activity. The domestic economy is also performed much more sluggish than in recent years. The Irish preferred measure for looking at economic activity is modified domestic demand, MDD, which grew by 7.7% and 11.6% in 2021 and 2022. It's expected to have grown by just 1.5% in 2023, according to the Central Bank of Ireland. While there are no signs of recession, it does show much more moderation in the country's domestic growth. In terms of productivity of individual firms, there is a small group of multinational companies who are a significant contributor to Ireland's aggregate productivity. But while the growth engine stuttered a bit over the course of 2023, there is no sign of broader weakness. Employment growth was strong in the first 3 quarters of 2023, for which information is available. The unemployment rate did creep up a bit over the course of the year, but it was coming from historical lows and returned to 4.9% in December of last year, similar to pre-pandemic levels. Overall, the labour market still seems to be in good shape, and public finances continue to look very healthy. Ireland was running a budget surplus of 2.4% in the second quarter of last year, the largest surplus in the EU. As a result, government debt to GDP is coming down rapidly. In 2Q 2022, it was still 50.5%, but it has dropped to just 43.1% in 2Q 2023. The main worries are whether public finances are still too stimulating in nature for inflation to fail or not. That does not seem to be the case, given how rapidly inflation has also been coming down. In December, Irish HICP was at 3.2%, down from 8.2% a year earlier. For 2024, expectations are on the modest side. While the pharma sector is expected to do better than last year, concerns about the impact of higher rates weigh on the economy. Investment will, therefore, continue to be under pressure. The sluggish global economic environment makes significant export growth challenging, and a recovery in domestic consumption is the most promising path for decent economic activity. With real wage growth recovering quickly, this is not a far-fetched prospect for the Irish economy.